Hey, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome. I'm Nina Della Salas, Senior Associate at M&A Associates, Inc. M&A is presenting and facilitating this afternoon's webinar. This webinar offers tips on developing your knowledge generation and evaluation plans for the 2026 S-STEM grant proposals. This webinar is geared for applicants for the Track 1 or Track 2 grants. Next slide, please. As you enter the Zoom meeting, please take a moment to introduce yourself using the chat box. Please share your role, whether you're a grant writer or prospective PI, co-PI, institutional research or sponsored program staff member, researcher, or evaluator. Please add your name of the institution and which track you're applying for, whether it's track 1, 2, 3, or another track. If you have any burning questions, please write them in the Q&A box, and we will collate and address them at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. Before we dive in, I want to highlight a few housekeeping points. As I said, we'll be using the Q&A box to collect your questions, and we'll respond to them at the end of our presentation. Please upvote questions you are interested in. We can also open the microphones for those unable to post their questions in the Q&A box during that time. We are honored to have a transcriber handling live closed captioning. You can access the transcript by clicking the live transcript closed caption icon from the Zoom menu bar. We're also honored to have ASL interpreters helping us along this journey. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties, please contact Rachel at rstivers@AAAS.org. Next slide. This material is based upon work supported by the National Science Foundation under grant number DUE 2224093. Any opinions, findings, interpretations, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this material are those of its authors and do not represent the views of the AAAS Board of Directors, the Council of AAAS, AAAS membership, or the National Science Foundation. Please note that we are promoting consultation with M&A as they are a REC partner. However, this does not constitute an endorsement of M&A as evaluators by the National Science Foundation. Next slide, please. The management of the S-STEM Resource and Evaluation Center was awarded to AAAS in October 2022 through a competitive NSF proposal process. The REC promotes effective strategies and practices to increase the number of talented, low-income students who obtain degrees and careers in STEM. The REC's work acts across multiple levels to accomplish this goal. For instance, it supports the effectiveness of the S-STEM portfolio through publishing outcomes and impacts reports. It builds capacity of current and prospective S-STEM grantees through webinars just like this. And it supports S-STEM scholars' STEM persistence and professional development by convening an annual in-person scholars meeting. We welcome you to visit our website to learn more. Next slide. Although the S-STEM REC is managed by AAAS, the full team consists of several partner organizations that work together to advance the REC's goals. Today's webinar is being facilitated by M&A. M&A provides evaluation and research capacity building for the S-STEM community through the REC. Next slide. M&A is a research and evaluation consulting firm based in Fairfax, Virginia, with clients across the nation. We are currently evaluating 9 S-STEM grants across all tracks, including an S-STEM hub. As part of the S-STEM REC Evaluation Capacity Development Suite, M&A is assisting both prospective and current S-STEM PIs, co-PIs, social science researchers, and evaluators. Our primary focus is to provide technical assistance guidance on the generation of knowledge, or GoK, and in the development of the evaluation plans for the S-STEM proposals, as well as providing ongoing TA for both researchers and evaluators for their projects. Next slide. From now through the submission deadline on March 3rd, the REC's evaluation TA will provide a suite of supports to assist you in preparing your proposal submissions. Besides this webinar, we'll have another one on February 10th, which will focus on Track 3 proposals, and one on February 17th that will address logic models and theories of change. There are also plenty of resources available in the resource section of the S-STEM REC website. Should you need more customized assistance, you can contact the evaluation TA team using the QR code that you see before you, or click on the URL request form for the TA request form. Unfortunately, we will not be able to review or write the generation of knowledge section or evaluation plans for any tracks. So any requests for such assistance will be kindly but firmly declined. Next slide, please. We've designed today's webinar to help you gain a better understanding of what generation of knowledge is and what evaluation entails, and tips for writing the GoK and evaluation plan for those of you submitting Track 1 or Track 2 proposals. At the end of this webinar, we ask that you complete a very, very brief survey to help us to understand how well this webinar met its objectives, how to improve on future webinars, and know more about you and your needs. Next slide, please. Here is the rundown of what we'll be covering today. Leading us in today's webinar is Dr. Kavita Mittapalli, CEO of M&A. For over 20 years, she has conducted research and evaluation for various programs and initiatives, including S-STEM grants. She worked at various consulting firms before founding M&A in 2005. Kavita started her career in agricultural science before becoming an applied sociologist and a mixed methodologist with an interest in research design. She brings her multidisciplinary skills and knowledge to all the work she does at M&A. Kavita, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nina, for covering the very pertinent housekeeping and introductory items. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I think we are going to the next slide, slide 11. There you go. Yeah, we could just stop here for a minute. So hi, everyone, again, Kavita Mittapalli from M&A Associates, Inc. We are the evaluation TA providers for the REC. And I see some of the familiar names, so good to have you again. So over the next two slides, I'm going to talk about some of the 2026 S-STEM solicitation needs. Next slide, please. Overall, the program now allows awards up to $2 million over 6 years, giving institutions more flexibility for long-term planning and full implementation. The way we say it, one of the major changes that affects Track 1 proposals, which must now include an initial planning or capacity building period. This is very critical for both research and evaluation because we have, quote unquote, a bit of time for planning or evaluation and GoK aspects for the project. During this phase, the most important part is also that the scholarships cannot be awarded to the students, and the scholarships only begin after the planning period concludes. This requirement does not apply to Track 2. In addition, Track 1 proposals must allocate at least 50% of the total budget directly to the scholarships. So these are entered as participant support or stipends on the NSF budget form. As always, proposals should always carefully review the current PAPG, which is the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, and the solicitation for detailed budget and eligibility guidance. Next slide. Another very critical slide here, which pertains to the generation of knowledge and the evaluation plan. The changes that really are affecting Track 1 and Track 2 proposals are that the evaluation plan, logic model, or theory of change is expected and should be included as a supplementary document. Typically, the evaluation plan is 1 to 2 pages. Proposals must also include a logic model or theory of change, as I mentioned, which should inform the project's evaluation plan. Track 1, the scholarship amount is $15,000, up to $15,000 per year for the undergraduates, and up to $20,000 per year for the graduate students. And by now, we all know that the S-STEM grant is a last dollar scholarship, which helps in the unmet need. Track 2, 60% of the $2 million go to the scholarships. And as I mentioned earlier, there is no planning period for Track 2. Next slide, please. Okay. So in the next few slides, I'll talk about project evaluation, followed by the generation of knowledge. First, I'd like to go over some of the solicitation requirements so that we don't miss out any details. Go back, please. We will hold here for a minute. In essence, tracks 1 and 2 proposals should describe a rigorous, clear, and specific external evaluation plan that is aligned with the stated goals of your S-STEM project and is executed by an external evaluator, and some of the details are found in section 2B. There should be a logic model that informs the evaluation and vice versa, which means that the evaluation is also referring to the logic model to make sure that things are happening as they have been planned. Next. Actually, I should just stay here. The evaluation must also be executed by an evaluator who is external to the project to provide objective and independent feedback regarding the progress of the overall project. The evaluator may be employed by the project's home institution as long as he or she works in a separate organizational unit, for example, a different department altogether. And they are not part of the core team that is proposing the S-STEM grant. Further, the evaluator should not be a co-PI or a senior personnel on the project, but should be compensated appropriately using other direct cost lines, such as consulting or other direct costs. Oftentimes we are asked, so what is the budget for evaluator? So the budget justification obviously should vary, should really imply what might be the number of hours, the kind of labor the evaluator is able to dedicate every year, and what might be the going rate, aka the market rate. Typically, as an experienced evaluator, we tend to request an evaluation budget of anywhere from 10 to 15%. But again, it's all over the place, and we know that. The other item that I want to also highlight is that all proposals should include a robust dissemination plan to share the project's implementation mechanisms, and the project evaluator is also expected to contribute to this aspect of the project. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the evaluation. Obviously, we know that it is applicable to all the tracks. If someone asks, what is the fundamental difference between the generation of knowledge and evaluation? In one sentence, it is usually the unit of analysis. So the unit of analysis for evaluation essentially is the project. It is the S-STEM project, right? So the evaluation plan typically must include formative evaluation that generally happens in the first, second, and third years. But for track 1, keep in mind, generally no evaluation activities must happen because there are no scholars. However, you may ask, then what does the evaluator do? Because there is a budget assigned for track 1 in the first year. Generally, it's a process, right? There are contracts involved. You can do IRB that could be completed in the first year. The evaluator could also attend the meetings, the project meetings, because in the first year, which is the planning year essentially, it is the setting of stage and building capacity, and also in some cases, the project may want to conduct a needs assessment. Needs assessment of the scholars. What exactly are the scholars requiring? We will talk about those in a little bit. So, going back to what I said, the evaluation plan must include a formative evaluation, which helps to guide the project planning, implementation, and improvement through feedback loops while allowing for any necessary corrective action. While simply put, the summative evaluation is assessing the project outcomes, accomplishments, some gaps, and also lessons learned across the project's full duration. Here, the feedback loop is very, very important. The formative evaluation takes place in the first through the second, third year, and then the summative evaluation typically goes into years fourth, fifth, and sixth. Keep in mind, there is an overlap as well, where formative and summative evaluation could happen around the same time, depending on how the project is progressing. Right? So, when we talk about outputs and outcomes, I know we are going to talk about that in the February 17th webinar, but just to give you a gist, the outputs are really literally been counting how many, how often, right? But the outcomes are literally the so what. If we have done all this for our scholars, what do we expect to see at the end? Or even while the project is happening? Are we looking at a GPA increase? Are we looking at retention, persistence? So those are the project outcomes, not to confuse with the outputs. So outputs and outcomes. So beyond the direct impact of S-STEM scholars, the projects should also attempt to measure the outcomes and the impact. This is very much clearly written in the solicitation in various places. So we are looking at the outputs and outcomes on the scholars, but we're also looking at the outcomes and outputs on the departments and or disciplines. Another critical thing to note. What kind of changes are we expecting to see once the scholars are getting scholarship, they are graduating, they're doing well, they do research, but then how is that S-STEM project really making changes institutionally or even department-wise? For instance, um, the faculty mentorship is one of the required EBPs, which is the evidence-based practice. It is a required practice for all S-STEM programs, right? So as a result of the faculty mentorship, how is that department really restructuring itself, reorganizing itself by providing the mentorship not only to the scholars, but to everybody? That is a classic example of what kind of changes can we expect once S-STEM really takes a strong hold in the STEM department. Okay. The other important thing is the evaluation design should match the scope of the project. Right. So sometimes what happens is the PIs and the co-PIs, they just send an outline of their proposal and they say, can you write an evaluation plan, a robust and rigorous evaluation plan? The simple answer is no, sir or ma'am, because we want to see what are the goals, the objectives, the activities, everything, because the evaluation is really about evaluating your project. Right. So that is one kind of a bit of a tug of war that to this day, after 22 years of being in the business, we get these requests, sometimes demands, dare I say, can you write a solid evaluation plan? We have an outline. Say no, nicely. Next slide, please. Okay, let's look into some of the sample evaluation questions, right? These are again a unit of analysis being your project. So keeping that in mind, some of the classic evaluation questions for the S-STEM projects, and we are pulling these from our own projects and also from some of the others. So these are very general, very generic, right? And you have to tailor them based on what your project is all about. So the ones in bold are those constructs or are those indicators that we are trying to measure or assess. These are essentially the program fidelity and the overall efficacy of your STEM project. So the kind of question that you may want to ask is, to what extent is the STEM project, you may have a name for it, being planned and implemented as desired? This gives you an indication of formative evaluation, that you are assessing the program as it is being planned and as it is being implemented across your grant years, grant year 1, 2, 3. And again, mind you, this goes on until the end because there is an overlap of formative and summative evaluation. We also want to know what's working, what's not working, and what's working for whom, right? Because context matters, right? We also want to know that for some scholars, certain interventions may work, but for some other scholars, it just may not work. So you want to know the nuanced aspect of what's working, for whom, under what circumstances, because context matters. And what are some of the big lessons learned? This is where the whole aspect of feedback loop and continuous improvement comes into being. Now, we are also required to assess the academic success of your scholars, right? So what kind of questions could we ask? Again, these are very high level generic questions. So you really want to tailor them based on what your program is all about, project is all about. So two big examples here. To what extent do project interventions, we'll talk about interventions in a bit, such as financial support, academic advising, and faculty mentoring. Mind you, these are all requirements of an STEM grant. Enhance the educational performance of low-income scholars in the project. We all know that STEM is really catering the needs of low-income, talented STEM students. So we want to know to what extent the financial support, academic advising, and faculty mentoring, these are all categorized as EBPs, evidence-based practices. Enhancing the educational performance. Now, what is educational performance? I mentioned it could be persistence, it could be graduation or completion, or any other outcome-oriented success of the scholar. The second question here is, how do scholars' participation in project activities such as workshops, mentoring, summer camps, it could be many other programs, right? Depending on what your PI and co-PI are designing, correlate with the academic outcomes like GPA and course completion rates. I use the word very carefully, correlate, and not causation, right? Because we know that it's extremely difficult to do a causational study in a program like STEM, or in general for any social science related, any STEM programs, because it's very difficult to really separate out some of the other metrics. Now, the other metric or construct that we would be interested to evaluate is the career and workforce readiness. The questions here could be, how effectively does the project prepare, again, low-income, talented STEM scholars for STEM workforce entry or advanced education opportunities? So you may have transfer students into your programs. Typically, it happens depending on the kind of institution you are and the kind of scholars you're attracting into your program. So you may have time to actually assess a bit of a long-term outcomes as well. That's why the questions of STEM workforce is critical. NSF really likes it when we go beyond just the outcomes of GPA, retention, or persistence, but we go a few steps ahead and talk about what happens when these talented STEM scholars leave our institution. Where are they going? What are they doing? Have there been any changes in their workforce status? Are there any changes in their wages? Are there any changes in some other thing? So if possible, look for these kinds of metrics, look for opportunities where you could also measure the career and workforce readiness for your S-STEM project. I had mentioned earlier about looking for ways to also assess any departmental or institutional change, right? So some of the questions could be like, with the S-STEM program, have you seen any changes in faculty mentorship that has gone above and beyond just offering these services to the S-STEM scholars? That would be a huge departmental shift, right? And that could be mimicked through some of the other departments too. Okay, next slide, please. All right, I'd mentioned that your evaluation plan typically is about 1 to 2 pages, and we do have the luxury of including the logic model or theory of change in the supplementary document. I know that the proposal also says that you could have the evaluation plan in the supplementary, but me being a paranoid person, I generally beg the PI or the co-PI to give me a page or page and a half so I can insert the evaluation plan in the main document. Right, God forbid, maybe the reviewer is very tired and they just don't want to read your evaluation plan, and they might say, oh my God, this proposal does not have an evaluation plan. So if you're like me, I would say at least use half a page or 1 page in the main proposal, which is 15 pages long, and write your evaluation plan. Have your formative and summative questions right in there, and have this data matrix because that saves a lot of space. So this data matrix essentially talks about what kind of data will be collected from what kind of sources, which is a data source and methods, by whom, which is a responsible party, and when. And then very briefly, an analysis plan and interpretation. So this is a very simple table, and this actually comes from the evaluateate.org. It's a wonderful website, and also you can easily create a simple table using this diagram. And as Rachel mentioned and Nina mentioned that, these slides are already available, so you can very quickly adapt and create a table like this. All right, next slide, please. All right, now let's begin to talk about the nitty-gritty of generation of knowledge. Mind you, I'm not using the term research, I'm using generation of knowledge, all right? So pay attention here because the next slide is going to be a heavy slide. Next slide, please. All right, so here we go. Research is not required for track 1 and track 2. Let me repeat this. Research is not required for T1 and T2. The core premise of an NSF S-STEM grant is to know its overall contribution to the broader fields of STEM education and workforce development through rigorous research studies. So generation of knowledge really applies to the overall intellectual merit of your S-STEM project. The nature of S-STEM projects generally aligns with the generation of knowledge through efficacy or effectiveness studies, which means going back to what I mentioned about correlational studies. And then if you're going to attend the next week's webinar, we're going to talk about some more in depth about the research that is required for track 3. But here we are using the term generation of knowledge. You will see there's a little link here, Common Guidelines for Education Research and Development. I would urge you to click on that link, or if you even just Google that, you will find a document that clearly talks about the types of studies that could be done. More on that later. Not only now, but also next week, we will actually really delve in depth about the kind of studies that could be done with track 3. So let's go back to the context of track 1 and track 2. What does generation of knowledge really mean? So in this context, your track 1 or track 2 projects should strive to increase the understanding about the contributions that the proposed scholar supports, or EBPs, evidence-based practices or interventions, or those activities such as financial support, advising, summer program, summer camp, research, those are known as the activities or interventions or EBPs, can make to achieve the goals of STEM retention and graduation when they are coupled with financial support. I'm going to say this again. So, what does generation of knowledge really mean within the context of tracks 1 and track 2? So in this context, the S-STEM projects should strive to increase the understanding about the contributions that the proposed scholar supports, aka the activities or the interventions that can potentially make to the program goals of STEM retention and graduation, aka outcomes, when they are coupled with financial support, which is the scholarships. So, somewhere midway in the solicitation, you will see this whole section on research on generation of knowledge and evaluation, specifically for track 1 and track 2. So I would say that please go back and read and reread because there's a lot of information in there. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, I did mention about the nature of research study, right? So if you clicked on that link of common guidelines for common research, so we have actually distilled that all into these items, which basically talk about what is the nature of that research or generation of knowledge that you're doing for track 1 and track 2. Right? So you may want to pay very careful attention and consideration to the type of study you may want to do. It could be a foundational study, or it could be an early stage or exploratory research or generation of knowledge, design and development, early or efficacy research. Generally, in my experience for track 1 and track 2, they don't really go beyond the design and development because one, we don't have the luxury of tracking down the scholars over a very long period of time. Our cohort sizes are small, right? Again, on that note, there are different ways of also dealing with small cohort size and come up with rigorous evaluations. But typically in our experience, we have seen that more advanced research are generally kind of reserved for track 3 grants. But for now, this is just to give you an idea of what kind of studies you could be doing for generation of knowledge for track 1 and track 2. Okay. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right. So on this slide, I'd like to talk about a bit more as to who does the work, right? It's more like a who done it or who does it slide. So we all agree that what gets measured gets done and also gets managed, right? Quoting Peter Drucker here. So tracks 1 and 2 projects, tracks 1 and 2 S-STEM projects are expected to contribute to the broader knowledge by not only conducting the generation of knowledge, but also by disseminating the results. And this is done by the external evaluator. So for track 1 and 2, the projects should plan to inform the understanding about the effectiveness of the factors and or activities that are ultimately associated with retention, student success transfer, if you're in a community college, academic success, and or degree attainment. Also, for track 1 and 2, the project's effectiveness should be assessed according to the nature of the problem that is being investigated. So what are we looking at? For instance, if your particular project is really looking at STEM retention, based on the data that you could pull from the institutional research, and you see that the STEM retention really goes down once the scholar or once your student is maybe a junior. So what exactly is happening between sophomore and junior that maybe you're seeing a huge decline in C chemistry, in mathematics and physics? So that is the problem that you're talking about because you're trying to investigate the nature of the problem that the proposed approach is intended to address. That is really critical when you are writing the section of generation of knowledge for your track 1 and track 2 proposals. So you may also ask, how are the problems really linked with the approaches to generation of knowledge? The nature of the problem is what your research is trying to understand. So you may want to see an affective, a behavioral, a cognitive, or maybe a dispositional change among your scholars across the grant years. Going back to the activities, how would you do that? So you may hypothesize that if we provide continuous, regular, or even periodic faculty mentoring to our scholars, we may want to see a change in the behavioral, like help-seeking behavior. That's a huge EBP. That's a huge intervention, and there's research around it. Behaviors of, say, transfer students, of, say, community college students. Because we know that in many cases, the community college students are non-traditional students. They have other things going on in life, and they just don't have time to stay on campus for most part. They're in and out in classes. They want to graduate, they want to get into their jobs, or they just want to upskill. How do we make sure that we're also providing high quality, useful, and meaningful mentoring for these students who probably need the most? Also knowing that these students probably don't have the help-seeking behavior. They just don't want to deal with this. They probably are older adults and they have other responsibilities and they probably think that, we can manage, we can do this, we can seek help elsewhere. We don't have to stay here and go to a tutoring club. We don't have to stay back and seek a mentor. So those are some of the problems that you may have identified already in your proposal. So what is the nature of the problem? And how are you going to help measure it is the generation of knowledge aspect. Okay. Um, so let's see. I think I've covered that. In terms of who does the work, so in the solicitation, it clearly says that the evaluation is contributing for all tracks, generation of knowledge. Evaluation actually is doing the generation of knowledge and dissemination for tracks 1, 2, and 3, while the research, which goes into much more in-depth, does the generation of knowledge for track 3. And there is a separate evaluator for track 3. Again, I don't want to confuse with track 1, track 2, and track 3. We are going to talk about that in much, much, much more details next week. So if you're considering a track 3, so please sign up and please join us because we are going to go into much in depth about the kind of questions that could be asked in track 3, which are quite separate and quite different from the ones that we ask in track 1 and track 2. Next slide. All right, so here are some of the samples. Earlier, I had mentioned about some of the samples for evaluation questions, and here are some of the questions for generation of knowledge. Look at these questions. They are a little bit more specific, and they dig a little deeper into the activity or intervention or EBP, evidence-based practice. How do low-income STEM scholars develop a STEM or engineering identity? One of the very common questions that we have seen in a lot of the proposals that we have reviewed or we have worked as evaluators. The other question, how does a particular activity, intervention, or EBP play a role in enabling the low-income scholars' sense of belonging, self-efficacy? SI is identity, science identity, or STEM identity, motivation, which are also known as the constructs in a STEM field. Again, going back to what the needs are, right? You just cannot put everything saying that, oh, these questions look really cool. Let me do everything. If you do everything, which means that you really have to do everything, right? If there is not a problem, I would suggest don't create one. The third question, how does a specific activity or intervention show its intended effects on scholars' cognition and or effective behaviors, both in the short and long term? So if you have a luxury of evaluating um, an S-STEM grant for over 4 or 5 years, then you could actually longitudinally look at the progression or growth or change in the scholar's cognition and or any effective behaviors, help-seeking behavior, seeking a mental health counseling, right? Seeking something else that was not happening prior to having that S-STEM grant. So that could be one of your potential research questions. One of the other questions, it's a bit of a long question, but again, you can modify it based on what you are trying to propose. If and how does the scholar background characteristics, like these are the independent variables, demographics, academic performance measures, affective factors, play a role in the decision making for choosing STEM majors, transfers, engaging in training or research opportunities, using support services, and careers or jobs when exposed to a certain intervention. Right, so these are some of the very high-level sample research questions that we have either used or have seen in many of the proposals. So again, research questions are very specific. They are focused inquiries that guide the direction of generating knowledge in your STEM project. So in the context of education and social science research, for an S-STEM project, the research questions are designed to generate knowledge that address a particular issue or a need within the STEM field. So all these questions that I went through are typically grounded in some existing research literature, also needs assessment to ensure that the study builds upon or contributes to established knowledge base. Another thing of note, the research questions must directly be linked to the unique needs of the population being studied. Do not forget this. Just because these questions are really cool, which I think they are, doesn't mean that you're going to lift them and use them because they may not be related. Context matters. So the research questions must directly be linked to the unique needs of the population being studied in your S-STEM project. I'm just prompting Rachel here or Tara or Julius if this might be a good time and space to share some of the EBPs link and the webinars that we conducted last year. So if you could pull those, I think the next couple of slides actually talk about the EBPs. All right. So some of the seasoned evaluators and researchers will also say that the research methods and the types of analysis should really be determined based on the research questions and not the other way around, right? So make use of some of the published, validated instruments, scales that are out there so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is so much out there, folks, and that's why I was mentioning about the link that the rec staff will kindly put here so that you have ready-made scales that you could actually pull. You could cite them for the proposal. You could cite them that these are the kind of scales that we are going to use to help measure the problem or the need that we have within our STEM population. Next slide, please. All right, so this is what I was talking about, the activity, intervention, or evidence-based practices. So evidence-based, context-specific interventions must be linked to low-income student needs. All your STEM projects must build the project on the needs analysis that is specific to the targeted population of low-income students at your institution. How do you do that? You conduct a needs assessment. Most of you probably have or in the process of doing so that you can pull in the data, right? And you can say that these are the specific needs of our students. Hence, we need the money to help support them. How are we going to do that? by providing these activities, these interventions, or these EBP. So we have 32 of them, folks. I had mentioned about motivation. I had mentioned about STEM identity. I had mentioned about sense of belonging, advising, faculty mentoring. There are 32 in all that we were able to research and pull some scales and instruments just for you. So take some time, go visit that website, and pull up the resources, and you will see there's this whole list of what might be most appropriate for your proposal. Some of you may also do literature review, establish a rationale for some proposed evidence-based activities that might be suited to your STEM project. You want to align your activities with documented low-income student needs. You also want to include evidence from research literature that helps support those interventions within the institutional context. By this, what I mean is that those interventions that could be applicable and be suitable for a community college context may not be applicable for a rural community college context. Something that works in one institution, an R1 institution, necessarily may not work in an R2 or an HBCU or an MSI. So know your audience. Know your audience's needs. Know your institutional's needs. And also your institutional's capacity and infrastructure to help provide those once you're awarded. Right. So these are some of the other things that I've talked about in much detail. But once you go to that website, put those resources, I think you will love us even more. All right, next slide, please. There you go. So go to that website or pull up your cell phone. There's a QR code and you will come across these. There are 32 of them. You will see bridge programs, you will see advising, interdisciplinary research, experiential learning, there is summer camp, then there is advising, there is mentoring, all sorts of things. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's that about the generation of knowledge and evaluation for the track 1 and track 2. Now, you may also be thinking about some of the other things that are also part and parcel of how to engage an evaluator or a social science researcher. First and foremost, you need to engage them early and often, which is now because you're writing the proposal now. So you want to be able to engage the evaluator and or a social science researcher, but don't share an outline, but actually share them a 60-70% done project narrative so that they get a gist of what exactly the goals are, the objectives are, the activities are, who is doing what, because then they can write a rigorous, robust, meaningful evaluation plan. I mentioned this several times before that the evaluator could be external, an external evaluator, consultant, or someone from another department within your institution. Or they could also be a completely different faculty member from another institution whom you probably met at a conference. They cannot be the PI or they cannot be a co-PI, right? So you want them to be part and parcel of the proposal planning phase. They typically write the evaluation plan. Going back to what Nina said, that M&A is not going to write your evaluation plan and is also not going to be able to review the plans because we are not contracted by you. So your evaluator will typically write the evaluation plan. They will also develop a logic model and or theory of change. Again, logic model is not the same as theory of change. So we'll go into much details on the February 17th webinar. So if you have nothing else to do, nothing better to do, please join us. Also, a seasoned evaluator will also know the difference between research and evaluation. I have already given you really good examples of research questions and evaluation questions, right? So you should not be conflating them. There could be some overlap, but the unit of analysis for evaluation, folks, is really your project. So that will give you an idea as to what kind of questions you should be asking in your evaluation. Also go with the understanding that there are certain expectations and certain goals that are to be met by the third party evaluator before and after the award. So clearly lay out the scope of work, what are the expectations, how many times do you want to meet with them. Keep in mind for track one, there is the planning period, right? The planning period, essentially the evaluator, you are setting up the contracts for the evaluator, you are completing the IRB, the Institutional Review Board process. The evaluator is also working with a social science researcher if you have somebody that is separate from an evaluator developing the instruments, right? Because they also need to be approved by the IRB. So you're basically setting up the stage, and so is the evaluator setting up the stage in the planning year for track one. Also keep in mind the institutional procurement procedures. In some cases, the institution might say that even if you are engaging an evaluator, now it doesn't assure or doesn't give a guarantee that the evaluator will be given the work upon award. So make sure that you, the PI or the co-PI or whoever's writing the grant is well aware of the procurement procedures at your institution. Because the evaluator would have spent time and effort, unpaid labor generally, during the proposal period, only to know that the work went to somebody else because they were not aware of the competitive bidding process. And budget. Again, this is a wild, wild west question. We are still trying to figure out. We are old and we are getting old, but still, it's a daily fight, folks, as to what should be the budget. Some would say it's 5 to 10%, some would say 10 to 15%. I would say go with 10 to 15% because as evaluators, we have to eat. Next slide, please. So in some cases, we also get questions as to how about we have an advisory team members and we go with an advisory team instead of an evaluator. Well, if I was a reviewer, I would have problem with that because the advisory team is a team. I'm not sure if they will have the time or the expertise. Even if they did have the expertise, would they have the time to do the pre and post surveys? Will they have the time to do a focus group? Will they have a time to do a site visit if they are local? How much of time and effort are they willing to provide for an STEM project that is $2 million? Will they be able to deliver an annual report? Will they be able to deliver and collaborate with the PIs and co-PIs? So that becomes kind of a little murky. So I would actually go with an evaluator rather than advisory team. Okay, next slide, please. Oh my God, that's it. So we are closing up. We have some NSF frequently asked questions. That's actually 2 years old now, I believe, or maybe last year. And there are three questions that are pertinent to our work is one, are research and evaluation required for all the tracks of S-STEM program? The answer is all proposals must require an evaluation plan. Research is not required for T1 and T2. However, evaluation is supposed to contribute to the generation of knowledge. I already went through this. Right. What do you mean by an external evaluator, right? So there are different ways of defining external evaluator. An external evaluator here is that one who is external to the program. They're necessarily not PI or co-PI, but they could be external to the department. They could be within the institution, but they could be external to the department, right? Or they could be a completely external evaluator as a consultant. Then are there expectations to what percentage? Here, NSF doesn't give a particular percentage, but as seasoned evaluators, we generally say 10 to 15%. Next slide, please. So we have a guidebook here for preparing your research and evaluation plan that was published last year in January, and we got some really, really good reception. So we would, recommend, encourage that you take a look. And it covers a lot of the things that we actually talked today and some. It also talks about the logic model, theory of change. So please take a look. Next. Okay, these are some of the references that we used. Next slide. And we are on to the questions and answers. Here we go.
Okay, thanks, Kavita. So we do have some questions. Some of them were already answered. One that was answered that probably needs maybe a quick follow-up was this question about the evaluator cannot be a co-PI or PI. But someone also said, well, this is a little bit sticky because what if the person, they really have a good person kind of in mind? So let me see if I can get that exact thing. Um, all
If the
right.
person is here, maybe we could have them come off the mic and talk to us, Nina, perhaps. Would be happy to, respond to that question. We do have time.
Okay. So it's Chanda Turpin. She says, I think that this question is particularly complicated for folks with discipline-based education research expertise. For example, a chemistry education researcher with an appointment in chemistry that might be a great evaluator for an S-STEM program in the physical sciences. So that's a great question. If they're, if you're trying to get a evaluator, but they're from, say, chemistry education, but they also fit in the chemistry department, can they be an evaluator?
If they're
Like,
not in the same department as the project, then it's fine. For instance, I'm saying that if you are proposing an STEM grant that helps getting the retention numbers high for chemistry, physics, mathematics, and your evaluator is from ed psych or a psychology, then that's totally okay.
okay,
Right. And we don't want that ed psych person to be the co-PI because that's what NSF says that they cannot be a co-PI. But say they are in the same university, but they are in ed psych or psychology or maybe public health, but they're really good evaluators, then sure, why not?
okay. All right. Thank you. Right. Next question. Um, okay. The grant deadline is March, meaning the awards might not be made until September. That is too late to identify new first-year students to fund. For track two, can we use the first year to develop our plans, evaluations, instruments, etc., and then select the scholars in year two?
Short answer, no. So let me give an example. Track two. So suppose you're awarded on September, say, 1st, August 31st, and your start date per your proposal is September 1st. What you can certainly do is request the program officer to provide a back date. For instance, you can move your start date of recruiting your scholars, say, end of spring. So you at least, or beginning of spring, right? So at least you have 3 to 4 months there, but you could not use the whole academic year just for planning because that is set aside for track one. That is clearly written that if you're applying for track two, you do not have the luxury of a planning year or a capacity building or infrastructure. So that's the rub here. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Next question. Can you confirm that the example research questions in the GOK section were intended to be for track one and two proposals?
Yes. Yes. So whoever asked this, you have to attend next week's and you will say, oh my God. Yeah. Yes.
All right. Thanks. Um, Next question. This question is about the logic model. I know there will be another session about this, but I'm wondering if on the logic model, is evaluation a project activity?
Well, I've seen that as a project activity, and nobody has said otherwise, right? So I would say, sure, it is an activity, it's an input. So people have included project evaluation as one of the activities. So yeah, sure. But I don't.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't.
Right. And typically when we do a logic model, we actually show it across the board because you're evaluating throughout the process.
Exactly.
So that in some way you capture it as an activity.
Exactly. One thing that is generally missing in the logic model is NSF funding. People just forget that if you don't have funding, right, that's the input. If you don't have funding, you obviously don't have a project, a STEM project. So please be sure to include NSF funding as the top input the first column for your input. Yeah.
Um, so next one's from Lara Smith. Do you recommend a site visit in each year of the grant? Say you're an evaluator.
Not necessarily, well, it depends, right? There has to be a certain purpose of the site visit. When I'm evaluating the grant, I do ask the PI and co-PI if they want us to do a site visit. If so, what might be the main purpose, right? So with technology being, just all over the place, right? I mean, we could do a virtual focus group, we could do virtual observations, but ultimately it goes back to the budget and the purpose. In some cases, we have done site visits over summer or end of spring semester when there is a big symposium, a research symposium, and we have captive audience of all the scholars there. So we use that opportunity to go there to the site, do a focus group or interviews, talk to the faculty mentors. So it's basically, doing many things in a span of 1 or 2 days. So the short answer is really depends on the need, also depends on the budget.
All right. Also from Lara, what do you recommend as the typical cohort size for new cohort participants in each year of the project?
So we couldn't recommend. It really depends on the cost of attendance and what your IR or financial aid people come up with in terms of that is the calculation. And there's like a whole section in the solicitation which talks about how do you come up with a cohort size.
Next question. Would you also recommend that the data matrix for the evaluation plan be included in the main body of the proposal or be included as a supplemental document?
Again, it depends. If you're like me, paranoid and worried that people will probably skip through it, I would just say write a little section and then just annotate saying that please see details or see the data metrics in the supplementary document. So you could do that. Or if you have the luxury of space, because we know that real estate is really precious, it's only 15 pages, and you have to write a whole section of literature review and everything needs and blah, blah, blah. You don't have a lot of space left. So what you would do is write a little section of the evaluation plan, and then the rest you can move to your supplementary document. You plan and see what works best for you.
Next question. Could you review the Track 2 funding award timing again? We submit in March 2026. When could the first scholarships be awarded? Would September 2026 be possible, or would spring 2027 be the first semester?
So I already, I think, responded to this question is that it depends on when you're awarded. This past year with the government shutdown, we heard that some of the awards were made in December or late December because of the government shutdown. So depending on the funding stream and how things are going, it has been a little bit all over the place, unfortunately. So ideally, we want to be awarded in, say, August, right? So we at least have 1 month full planning time so that we can get everything in place and have that red carpet rolled out for the first cohort. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen because the contracts are not in place. The faculty members need to be put on board. Everything happens, right? So in our experience with our track two, we've seen that the project has, even though it was funded on September 1st as a start date, the real start date was generally January 1st or February 1st. And that has been okay so far because they were able to onboard the scholars, because they were able to recruit, put out the flyers, and do everything during the fall period. Again, as I mentioned, make sure that you talk to your program officer before you make the decision that, okay, we're not going to recruit our scholars. So this has to be approved, this has to be mentioned and approved by the program officer before you do so.
Next question. Scholar cohorts will likely be small based on total number of students' budgets will or allow. However, can extracurricular or non-required activities be opened up to a broader cohort of students in cohort with a STEM scholarship plus others who may or may not meet S-STEM financial needs requirements?
Yes, excellent question. Whoever asked it. So usually those are called participants and they're not called scholars. So again, we are not denying services, right? The whole point is you're not denying services. So if there is a summer bridge program happening on your campus and the scholars show an interest, so the scholars are already getting money or stipend to participate, right? And also to be part of the STEM program, but you also have some really good um, STEM STEM students who are not receiving the scholarship, right? But they are eligible for that summer program, summer bridge program, summer camp, what have you. I would say absolutely, you will not be denying any services to anybody. They will only be known as participants. And this is also a really good research evaluation problem to have, is that you could then have a really natural comparison group. So you could actually do a really neat study as to the opportunities being the same. Have the STEM scholars performed any better, or are they at par with those who did not receive the scholarship? So that's a really neat thing to have.
Hmm. Um, so Beth Berry asked, when do you expect to notify the awardees? Well,
Well, again, we are not NSF, and REC
mhm.
is not NSF, right? So we are the contractors who have been contracted to run the REC, right? So we don't know, and we're also not reviewers. So we really don't know. We are hoping that it will be within 6 months. But again, so many things can happen between now and 6 months.
Are there any other questions or
Feel free to
follow-ups?
come off mic and talk to us as friends and colleagues. If you're not comfortable, we can stop the recording and talk as colleagues. So please feel free to talk to us.
Hi, Kavita. This is Laura Smith.
Hello.
Hi, I just wanted to say this is such a great webinar, and you made it so clear and covered so much information. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Hi, Heather Cohen.
Hi.
Thank you again. I had asked a question about the non-STEM scholars.
Okay.
Um, and so let me just ask one little follow-up, if you don't
Sure.
mind.
Sure.
You said that that is, and that's a great point about them being a good control group. But does that mean that, if you have a summer program and you're providing money for students to do maybe a research experience or something along that lines, would that group still be eligible to receive that money, or the program is just open to them?
It's on, yeah, the program is open, but the scholarship is really for
That,
the scholars because you're pulling it out of the participant cost, right?
right,
Yeah.
right.
So you
Okay.
cannot, I mean, you like logically cannot justify why
Yeah.
you are spending money on some other thing. Yeah.
But maybe if there's a seminar that's open and
Absolutely. Yeah.
everybody could attend. Okay.
Absolutely. And if
Perfect.
there are ongoing seminars, Heather, I've seen in the programs, ongoing seminars, you don't have to reinvent them.
Yeah.
Ongoing seminars, have your scholars attend, have everybody attend. So why not, right?
Perfect. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So we could probably pull up the survey and hand it back over to the rec staff while the questions are still coming in, Nina, if that's all right.
I'm looking to see if there are any others. Oops, there's one. Okay, I am confused about having some part of the evaluation section can go to the supplement. So, Kavita, maybe you want to go
Yeah.
over again
So
what
so
goes
the solid,
into the
yeah, no,
main.
of course, yeah, sure. So the whole point here is real estate, right? So we have 15 pages to write. The PI and the co-PI have 15 pages to write everything. And typically they will leave maybe half a page for evaluation. So if I were writing the evaluation plan, I would request the PI or co-PI to at least leave 2 pages. And in many cases, that's not possible. So we do have the luxury of not including the full evaluation plan in the main body of the proposal per the solicitation. So it's your choice. If you want to write, condense the whole evaluation plan along with your generation of knowledge and dissemination plan within half a page or 1 page, go for it. More power to you. But I personally want more space. So what I would do is I want to add the table. I want to write the whole story of my life, da 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 da. So I need at least a page and a half, right? So I request for a page and a half. If I don't get page and a half, then I would write portions, specifically the questions, my methodology, my framework, and then I would say, look at the table in the supplementary document and the logic model in the supplementary document, because a logic model typically does take a lot of space because it's like a little table, right? So that's why. So you decide, but it has to be included somewhere. So you decide where you want it.
Hey, got more questions. All right. One, would you recommend that the evaluator also contribute to the development of the questions identified in the GOK section?
Yes, that's the whole point. Yes. Track 1 and track 2. Yep.
And then next one is, what will be the file name of the supplementary document for this evaluation plan? Should it be in the supplementary document of 4 pages limit?
I think supplementary document does not have a limit, but I may want to check the frequently asked questions. There's probably not.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the 4 pages may refer to maybe the planning. I remember it was like 4 pages for the planning year for track
Yeah.
1.
Yeah.
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 But you might want to check again with the
PAP.
with
Yeah.
solicitation and a PAP chief of
Mhm.
what if there are any page limitations. Yeah. Others.
Did we put the survey link? Because we're not sharing the screen at the moment. Oh, great. Thanks, Julius. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. So there is indeed no page limit to supplementary documents. There you go. Yeah.
Okay, Nina should, do you want to just close this out in these last 2 slides?
Sure. Let me go and okay. So thank you all for attending. And one way you can thank us is by providing us good feedback, or especially feedback to help us improve on webinars like these. So please click on the link or use a QR code that you see before you. It's a really short survey. Next slide, please. And want to thank you again for all of you all participating, and thank you for Kavita and all our colleagues here from AAAS, transcribers and ASL interpreters. Please don't forget to register for the upcoming webinar. So again, February 10th will be for track 3 webinar, track 3 grants, I'm sorry, proposals, and then February 17th, as some of you have already been talking about, is for the generation of knowledge and evaluation plans. For those of us wondering, feel free to save your chats at this time. Feel free to save your transcript at this time. We'll have also a lot of these things, the recordings also posted in momentarily. So keep an eye out for those. And then please feel free to stay connected with us. You see all those links for our website, our mailing list, our LinkedIn, and Blue Sky. So we'll stay on for a little bit longer if there are any other questions. But thank you again for attending.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.